Hello, Republic of Gamers, and welcome to ROG Pulse. My name is Jake Kalinsky, and I am joined by Sascha Crone today. And Sascha, what are we talking about?
Oh, Valheim, yeah.
That's the actual official topic tonight is Valheim?
Oh, you mean the official topic? Oh, yeah. TDP and TGP.
No,
We're talking about...
Valheim. We're talking about Valheim.
Okay, yeah. Hell yeah. I
You've
wouldn't mind.
You've been playing Valheim?
Oh, yeah. Who hasn't, right?
Yeah.
I can see everybody on Steam, like all my friends, everybody's either playing Valheim or they're talking about it and wishlisting it. And yeah, it has a lot of potential for addiction. I can definitely see that.
Yeah, as someone who never really got into Minecraft, I kind of, it was just, I don't know if I was too old or for whatever reason, I just
Same.
never got into Minecraft. To me, this is like, I see the appeal now. I've liked survival games for a long time, but this really does have like that Minecraftiness where you can destroy the terrain. There's all kinds of building. Like you can really landscape everything, because the games I've played in the past, like the Forest, they don't have that element. And I think that element of like, okay, no, I'm actually going to flatten this out, or I'm going to dig over here and or whatever. It's extremely fun. It's really,
the combat is much better than the Forest as well, like we were talking earlier, right? Yeah, definitely much nicer. And I feel like the terrain deformation, there's still some
it's a little janky
opportunity for improvement there. But yeah, I think Minecraft is a little too cartoony for me as well. And I like Valheim in that sense, and it has like this Viking vibe, which I like.
The bosses are cool. Like it's thematically really cool. It's made by 5 people. 5 people made this game, and they've sold 5 million copies. I have no idea.
I really like. It's crazy. They must have worked on it for quite a while. And I was thinking it must be so cool. They probably love this kind of game. And then for like 2 years, they were building this game, and they must have had so much fun building that game. Or maybe that's like this really naive outside view. For them, it was like a nightmare.
Who knows?
To make it all work.
Who knows? I mean, it's just another one of those games that kind of came out of nowhere and is a huge hit immediately. So congrats to Iron Gate Studios, I believe is the team that made this. It's cool.
And Coffee Stain Publishing. I mean, they do a really good job picking up titles like this. Deep Rock Galactic, one of my all-time favorites that I've sunk a lot of time into. This
I hear
also
great
from
things.
Coffee Stain.
Yeah. And Goat
They're
Simulator.
really good at picking up. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Not a huge fan.
It's funny. I never played it, but I laughed at the videos I saw when it came out.
Oh yeah. There's definitely some really good YouTube content from that game.
Half the time, that's all that matters. Entertainment galore. Well, as much as we'd like to do a second Valheim podcast, we actually already did one on Tuesday. So if you want to look at the past broadcasts, we chatted about survival games. Me and my coworker Dan, that works on our video team, we just jumped in and really just talked about Valheim and full hour show on survival games. So check that out if that's what you're hungering for. But tonight we're talking about TDP and TGP specs on our laptops for the 30 series that came out just recently and are still launching. So Sascha, let's kind of explain just like a basic entry. What exactly is TDP and TGP?
Okay, so TDP stands for thermal design power, and TGP is thermal graphics power. So TDP is generally what's used for CPUs, and then for GPUs, it's a slightly different acronym because it's graphics, and for GPUs, it actually excuse me. For GPUs, it actually includes GDDR memory as well. So it's both the chip, the GPU, and the GDDR memory together. So the total power that the graphics system uses, basically. And more power means more performance, obviously. And in desktops, you usually buy CPUs that are like at least 65 watts, and sometimes they go as high as 140 watts, 150. I think there's some that are even higher. And for servers, you can go even higher. So that's basically the power that the CPU consumes, and all of that is turned into heat. So when you have a CPU that uses 100 watts of power of electricity, it also generates 100 watts of heat that you then have to dissipate with a cooler. So for graphics, it's the same thing. So basically, more power, you get more performance, but you also have to deal with more heat as a result. And that's important for laptops because you have limited space. So you can see in desktops, you can have giant tower cooler like this big, or you can have a liquid cooler, a 360 millimeter radiator, or even do a custom loop with like several 480 radiators. There's some crazy builds, and you can dissipate heat much better, much more
Right.
heat, and you can make it much quieter.
Well,
But in
it's
a
not only
laptop,
just heat though, right? You're also worried about your battery life because with a desktop, you're plugged in.
Yep.
Right. In a
Yeah,
laptop, you're not
correct.
necessarily always plugged in. And if you give this machine this crazy amount of power that's generating tons of heat, and then your battery life goes down by, I don't know, 20, 30%. Is that
That's one of
worth
the
it?
things. That's one of the things that made the G14 so nice is, we worked together with AMD on bringing down the TDP from 45 to only 35 to have that high efficiency, only 35 watt CPU. That helps with battery life as well.
Yeah.
And another thing for laptops is also the thickness, because if you need more cooling, you need to generally make the laptop thicker, maybe even make it wider. I think I mentioned in another episode why you need it to be wider, so you have more space for fins to dissipate the air and the heat through there. And another thing is also the weight, and in particular the laptop adapter weight and size. So if your CPU or your system is drawing more power, then you need a bigger power brick as well to power the laptop and to charge up the laptop. So I mentioned in an earlier episode, again, about our new adapters in 2021. We have a really cool new 240 watt adapter that is 300 grams, I believe, over 300 grams lighter than the 280 watt adapter that we have. And it's 40 watts less, but it's 300 grams lighter, and it's more compact as well. So that's another reason why you maybe don't want to go for the highest possible power in a laptop, because it makes the laptop thinner and lighter.
Okay, so if we're just talking about power equals performance, and we want to, if people want to try to push it to the limit, I heard there was a group in China on some forum that they're claiming they were able to get 20% more performance on the RTX 30 series. Is this a valid claim? Like, what do you think about this?
Well, yeah, I guess it's a valid claim. I don't know how they did it. We're looking into it. I can tell you that it's not just, so what they did is they flashed the VBIOS of their laptop to boost the wattage of the GPU. So the TGP, they boosted it from 130 to 150 watts. And that 20% boost that some people are talking about, I think that's actually comparing 115 watts to 150 watts, so 115 to 150. And even then, 20 watts performance improvement is a lot.
Yeah.
And that can't come just from the TGP. So it's very likely that they used some exotic cooling and maybe overclocked it as well. If anybody knows more details about this, let us know. So yeah, we're looking into that. And to give you an idea, generally, you don't get that much extra performance when you push up the wattage. So for desktop CPUs, for example, you have usually around 100 watts for a CPU. And for laptops, it's usually 45 or even 35, right? And then there's U-series processors as well for ultra portables that are only 15 to 20 watts. It's not like you're getting only 20% of the performance at that point.
Right.
And for a 45 watt laptop CPU, you're not getting only 45% of the 100 watt desktop CPU. So there's always diminishing returns when you up the power. And it's the same for the GPU. So if you increase the TGP and the power, you don't get like 10% more performance from 10% more power. You get much less than that. And even at the point where it scales nicely, you usually get 5% more performance for 10% more power. And then after a certain point, when it doesn't scale that well anymore, you give it 10% more power and you get like 3% more performance, or like 2% more performance. So yeah, there's a reason.
The amount of heat that comes
this,
from that, the amount of battery drain, if you're trying to play in battery, that comes from that. That's is it worth it?
And you need a bigger laptop adapter, a bigger laptop chassis overall. So there are laptops that use desktop CPUs and desktop GPUs. Well, not desktop GPUs, I think, hasn't been done recently because the chip vendors don't want that anymore. But desktop CPUs is still a thing for some laptops. And you can see those laptops are humongous. So those are the really big, like 10-pound laptops. Yeah, so I don't
have to talk about mine again, but it's a backbreaker. You do not want to travel with it.
Yeah. And the thing is, there are use cases for this. There are people who need that extra performance. But if you actually look at the performance, you're not getting that much extra performance. So your laptop is like twice as heavy and 2 times as thick or 3 times as
It's
thick.
just not
You're not
worth it.
getting double the performance or 3
Yeah,
times the
yeah.
performance. Yeah. So it's all about that efficiency scaling, essentially. And what's new about this right now, what we're talking about it is because in the past there was max Q and max P. So you had 2 separate levels of power and different levels of efficiency, basically.
Right.
And for those, generally the audience had some kind of idea, like we all kind of knew, okay, max Q is lower power, higher efficiency, and max P is higher power, and you get more performance, but efficiency is worse as well. So that isn't the case anymore with the latest generation. So right now, instead of having 2 different points, and you can still adjust the wattages a little bit up and down from either of those 2 starting points, it's different now that there's just one big range. So for the new 3000 series mobile GPUs, there's just a range of wattages for the 3080, for example, from 80 watts to 150 watts, which is almost twice, right? And between that, you can kind of pick whatever wattage you want for your laptop design.
So this is a larger range of wattages. How much of a difference is it comparatively? Is it like dynamic? Is it much more dynamic in terms of the options available for watts?
Yeah, so previously there was something, previously you had 2 steps. You had max Q, which started around 80, and you could go up to around 100, maybe boost to 110. I think we were one of the only ones that boosted to 110.
So that's a pretty small range.
80 to 100 was the normal one for max Q. And for the 20 series and the 10 series, and then for the max P, way back, like for the 10 series, it actually started for the 1080 at 150 and went all the 150. Yeah, it started at 150 and it went all the way to 220 watts. So from 150 to 20, that's a pretty big range.
Yeah.
Most of those laptops didn't go to 220. They were like 150, maybe 180. So you can see, instead of having these 2 ranges, there's now 1 range, and there's a much bigger focus now, which makes sense as we're going with the times over the years on portability and making the laptops more compact, because there's less and less people who want that, Chungus laptop, 10-pound laptop to break their backs.
Chungus is still like one of my favorite words. It's just such a great word.
Yeah, it rolls so nicely off the tongue. Yeah,
it does. Buttery. So how does dynamic boost play into this?
Okay, so dynamic boost is a new technology from NVIDIA that has been around, I think, since the 10 series, but back then it was just you could basically boost the power of the graphics if your thermal design is capable of delivering that extra power.
Okay.
And now it changed to it's dynamically using the total design power of the laptop. So both the TDP and the TGP, there's parts of it that can be shifted around. So when you build a new laptop, you have to think about what CPU are you going to use, how much power is it going to use, and how much heat you have to get rid of. And for the graphics, the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And they're side by side, so that's all.
They're side by side, and the cooling system is connected.
Right.
So, and it makes sense for the cooling system to be connected. So when you're only using the CPU, let's say you're video editing or doing some heavy CPU task like 3D modeling or something, or compiling code, you can then use the whole cooling module for both the CPU and GPU to only cool the CPU. That means you can boost up the CPU performance higher, boost the TDP higher, and if you're playing games, you're not loading the CPU to 100%. That does happen in some cases, but it's rare. So then you can use extra capacity from the CPU side of the cooling system to cool the GPU. And that's where NVIDIA then came in and was like, hey, you know what? When you're playing games, you usually don't use the CPU at 100%. So how about we offload some of that to the GPU? So especially in titles where the CPU loading is lower, we can now boost, or the NVIDIA driver can now boost the power of the graphics by 5 watts, 10 watts, 15 watts, and then get you extra performance that otherwise would be used to cool the CPU, which isn't really necessary because it's not running at full power.
Awesome. So really just min-maxing as much as possible with every machine.
Yeah, this does make the whole situation more complicated, though, as you can imagine. So there's no longer one wattage that the system runs at. It could be this or it could be that, and it depends on the game. And I think it even changes based on graphics drivers. So you might notice that, right now the GPU is only running at a certain wattage in this game. And then when you update to a new driver, it's possible that then it goes to a higher wattage. So maybe we can get some more FPS in Valheim. I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, the game is a beast for a lot of people, but
Not well optimized. Yeah.
no, especially on I play on a server with like 10 people, and as people build more, it's going down. But anyways, we're gonna try to do a Valheim podcast again. We need to stay away from that game. It's dangerous. Okay, so how do we, obviously when we're building a device, what are the big variables with choosing the wattage, right? We gotta look at the weight of the device. We got to look at the size of the battery. We got to look at the heat. We got to look at the how thick or thin the device is. And
and the reason why some people might wonder, why does NVIDIA open up this big range of wattages? Why don't they just say this GPU is 100 watts, this GPU is 150 watts, and that's it? So if you would do that, you would end up with most laptops being very similar, and that's something that might not work for everyone. And overall, if you look at the big picture, it's better that there are more options and you have more different laptops that go into slightly different directions that overall can cover all the different needs by the different kinds of customers that are out there much better. So imagine you wouldn't want one kind of laptop that, like this is the CPU power, this is the GPU power, and then you can standardize the panel as well. There's just this panel, and then there's just this thickness, and then all the laptops are pretty much the same. If you want something thinner and lighter, it just doesn't exist. Or if you want something with more performance and you're okay with it being thicker and heavier, it also doesn't exist because it's all just fixed.
right.
So that's kind of the idea why both Intel and AMD and NVIDIA are opening up those ranges and have different options. You have the U series, you have the H series for CPUs. The U series usually are 15 to 20 watts, 25 watts. And then you have the H series, which is around 45. And then Intel and both AMD have a 35 watt options as well now, which is like a more efficient version for the H45. And then you have desktop CPUs as well as an option for really big laptops. And on the GPU side, you have this range from 80 watts to 150 watts for the top 30 series GPUs, which allows you to make thin and light laptops with a 3080. And it allows you to make really high performance, thicker, heavier laptops with a 3080. And those are going to perform different. So that's the reason why we're doing this episode, is we want to get the word out. We don't want to mislead anyone, and we don't want anybody to, get the wrong idea and see the review or hear about performance from a big 3080 laptop and then buy a slim and light 3080 laptop
and expect the same results. Yeah.
And not be aware that that's different. So obviously, if you buy a bigger and thicker and heavier laptop, you're going to get extra performance. How much extra performance? That's, we don't even talk about that, because that should be something that's conveyed by media, by independent testing. We don't want to, be the one to talk about this. I think it's definitely better to let media handle that. And there's a lot of reviews that compare that and point out. So you can look at different laptops and see how does a thin and light 3080 compare with a big and heavy 3080 laptop, for example.
Well, we actually recently published all the specs here, and we can take a look right now at pretty much all of the wattages that we're talking about. So again, this is the full list of laptops and the various models, whether it have a 3080, a 3070, a 1650, a 3060. There's a lot of different options here. And as you just mentioned, you could buy a G15, for example, right? And the G15 could have a 3070 or 3060, right? And you're going to be able to choose your options with that. But which one are you just talking about specifically? Was it the Scar with the 3080 or the Zephyrus G15? You were just saying the 3080 on the Zephyrus G15, and the TGP is 80, right? Whereas if we look at a 3080 on Like the Scar, for example, is up to 115. That's a pretty big difference. 35 difference in wattage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, we didn't just so we shared this with media to publish as news, and a lot of media published this. We also added this to our product pages. So if you go to our product pages and you click on tech specs, where you see all the specifications, the CPU, the IO, and everything, we have this on there now. So you can see very clearly which laptop has which GPU option with which boost clock and TGP. So that gives you a very clear idea. So you can get an idea, is this, close to the upper range of the wattage that's possible for this GPU, or is it more like the basic range for this wattage for this GPU? To give an idea, are you getting, closer to the full performance, or are you getting like slightly less performance because it's a more slim chassis and it's more geared towards slim and light and efficiency? And you'll notice from the boost clock, so just to be clear that there's no confusion about it, we have a factory overclock on almost all our laptops. I think all our laptops, all our GPUs have a factory overclock. So you'll see that the clock there is higher than what's the official clock communicated by NVIDIA and by some competitors as well. So some people were asking me about it. How come your clock is 100 megahertz higher? Well, we have a factory overclock. So that's the reason. And yeah, the TGP, you can see we have the TGP here, and then we have the dynamic boost, and together that's the maximum GPU power. So you can see how that's kind of like combined together. So the TGP is basically what's guaranteed. It's always going to run at least at this wattage. And then dynamic boost is something that happens based on how heavy the CPU is loaded, and if the NVIDIA driver is detecting that this is a game that benefits from boosting the GPU by not giving the full power to the CPU, or the CPU not needing the full power. So that kind of is a dynamic thing. That's why it's called dynamic boost. So that changes with driver updates, and it varies from game to game. And you notice some games use dynamic boost and some don't, and some games use dynamic boost more than others. So you'll see higher GPU temperatures, and you'll see better performance in the titles that do use it. Well, not all titles. Some titles don't actually benefit from having extra GPU power. So if you're thinking of like CSGO, for example, that's a scenario where
it's not going to change.
GPU is not
going to change anything.
Difference.
Yeah. And some game, like you said, it's different for every single game. Some games use way more CPU than GPU, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah. So we made this table public, and we put it on the product pages, and we also made it very clear. There were some people that were concerned that maybe some customers aren't aware that a laptop GPU and a desktop GPU aren't the same, because for the 10 series, it was the same. You are getting exactly the same shader count, the same silicon, the same chip, and not the same clock speeds, but very close to the clock speeds. So for example, a 1080 desktop and a 1080 laptop were very close performance-wise. And now this has drifted apart a little bit further. So for laptops, you're getting different amount of shader cores and different clock speeds compared to the desktop version, even though they're called the same. So the 3080, 3070 laptop and desktop aren't exactly the same. And that's why we also made it clear on the product pages, 100% clear, it's a laptop GPU. It's not a desktop GPU.
Right.
There are, as far as I know, no laptops with desktop GPUs. But yeah, we just wanted to be 100% clear on that.
I'm surprised they're not just always labeled like 3080M. And so on, right? So
that's how it used to be.
I know, and I'm surprised that's not the norm nowadays. Just because you're right, it is a little bit confusing if you're not fully plugged into this. That a laptop GPU, it's not exactly the same 3080 that you'd be buying if you were to buy one for your desktop. And well, obviously, there's reasons for that when it comes to, again, heat and
efficiency
and everything. So. But here we are.
You could also. I remember back then when the GPUs were still the 9 series, where it was like 980,
980M or 980. That's
980M, 960, 965, 970. Those were still called M for the mobile version.
Yeah.
And even back then, there were people complaining that it's misleading, because even though there's an M at the end, maybe some people aren't aware that that's the mobile GPU.
But there's still enough people that would be like, why is there an M? Let me Google that. Oh, okay, that makes sense, right? There's at least something that but anyways, that's... That's my two
I think
cents.
I think if there would be a desktop 3080 available in a laptop, and then there's a mobile version of the 3080 as well, then that would be really misleading, because then it would be possible to get desktop level performance in a laptop, albeit be it a like really big, thick laptop.
Right.
But then it would definitely be there. But right now, it's not really there. So I understand some people might get misled by this, and they would think they get exactly what's in a desktop in their laptop. But at the same time, it is the fastest GPU you can get on a laptop. So even though it is slower than the desktop version, it's still the best you can get. So I mean, there's always two sides of the coin, like looking at this, right? So yeah, but just to make sure that nobody gets confused about this, and to avoid any confusion as much as possible, and to allow people to make, educated decisions and do research and really know what they're getting into, we're putting all this information out there and sharing it as much as possible, which is why we're doing this podcast here today as well, to get the word out to as many people as possible. What exactly is the wattage situation? What's the performance situation? So yeah, the article you brought up is a very good point. There are a lot of people who read that and then thought, oh wow, so 20 watts more on the GPU and I get 20% extra performance. That's crazy. I want 20 watts more on my GPU in my laptop. But that's not really the case. So again, I don't know how exactly they achieve those performance levels, just by increasing the power. So I can throw some numbers out there. From our engineering team, what I've been told, what we found is until around 115 watts is where the scaling is still going well, where you still get a reasonable amount of extra performance for the extra power you give it. Up until around 100, 115 watts. And above that, the efficiency curve starts to become more flat, and it's flattening out. And then you see something where going from 130 to 140 watts, for example, that's around 7% more power, but you're only getting around 2, maybe 3% extra performance. And in some cases, you're getting 0% extra performance. It depends on the game as well and the situation. So at that point, going from 130 to 140, there's already not that much extra performance you're getting. And then going to 150, that's another thing where you get less performance, even less performance. So just to give everybody a heads up, if you're getting a laptop with 130 watt or 120 watt, 115 watt, you're not losing out that much performance. It's not that much of a difference. And again, look at the reviews, compare different models. It's sometimes a little confusing because different media uses different ways to measure the performance, so you can't directly compare it, but it still gives you an idea. There's a lot of media that has tested several laptops now with different wattage configurations, so you can have like a side-by-side comparison of like a fully maxed out 3080 compared to a 3080 that's running around 115 or 130 watts. And yeah, I think Dave2D did a really nice video about it as well, where he explained it as well, where he was like, yes, there are going to be, I think he was talking about the Zephyrus Duo. Yeah, he was talking about our new Zephyrus Duo, the GX551, where he was saying there are going to be other laptops with higher GPU wattages, but the extra performance is not going to be that much more. Yeah, so that's, you are getting extra performance, obviously, but it's not a big difference.
Let's kind of just talk about situations where we might have a 3080 in a machine that's not going to have the highest wattage. So like the G15, smaller machine.
Yep.
Some people might say, okay, well, why would I put a 3080 in that device if I'm going to be putting it at the same wattage that you're going to put a 3070 in? Now, what are the benefits to having a 3080? More VRAM? Like, are there the things like there that really stand out to make the 3080 superior here?
Yeah, with a 3080, you get the option to either go for 8 GB or 16 GB. So for some people, who want 16 GB, who need it, I think for some content creators and for some GPU accelerated general purpose GPU applications like developers, that is really important. don't think necessarily mining, but
Yeah, mining and
there's something
gaming
similar,
probably not as
something
much of a
like mining, but actually for science and not for profit. Those kind of applications using the GPU not to play games, but for something else, to run code on it. Those applications tend to benefit from extra GDDR memory. And then for some content creation like video editing or 3D rendering as well.
Yep,
that's one benefit.
definitely.
And another thing is, if you think about it, that wattage you can get a 3070 at the same wattage, but the 3080 is still going to perform better.
Right.
It's not going to be a huge difference, but it's still going to be better. And for people who want a slim and light ultra portable laptop, to have the option to go for a 3080, even though it's not the full performance of a 3080, but hey, I can still get extra performance out of it. There are people who definitely want that. Me personally, I think I probably wouldn't.
You'd
I
go
would
for a
probably
3070?
go for 3070 or 3060.
Oh yeah,
I think the 3060 is very interesting price performance wise. But there are people who do want that, and like I said, we don't want to dictate what options are available, and we fully support AMD, Intel, and Nvidia in this strategy to be more open and give us, the laptop maker, more flexibility and more range to try and do innovative form factors, try to do different form factors, so you have a wide range of laptops to choose from. That's,
because
in the end,
everybody has a
wants,
different
right?
use. Yep. Everybody's going to use their machine differently. Everyone's going to have a different preference when it comes to size, weight, whatever, and power, because that's the beauty of it. And more flexibility, more options in a device that is, really not something you're going to change too much, right? Your laptop is pretty much, that's what you get. Aside from maybe swapping out the hard drive or RAM, but
again, to go back to the G14, like the G14 has been, a super popular laptop for us, and people love it. And something like the G14 wouldn't have been possible if the CPU TDP were always fixed at 45, and if the GPU TGP would always be fixed at the highest that it should be at, that's defined by the chip vendor, by Nvidia. So if they would have said, a 2060 always has to run at this GPU wattage, which would be the 115 watts, maybe, that never would have happened in the G14. So having a G14 in, and that's kind of like the innovation and the flexibility that you get as a result of having this range and having this flexibility from the thermal design power from the TDP and TGP.
Now we can achieve like way more power and results in these smaller form factor devices, even though it might not be as much as a G17.
Right. And I mean, does the G14 have the fastest CPU and the fastest GPU? No, it doesn't. But does it have to? That's the G14 is all about. It's only 1.6 kilos. It's super small and light. And that's something that a lot of people like. And you still get a 2060. You don't get the full performance technically of what you could get out of a 2060.
Right.
But do you have to?
Just kind of
to come back to your
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
To come back to your question about like, does it make sense to have a 3080 in there and something? When we announced the G14, there were actually a couple of people who asked us, why didn't you put in a 2080 in there, a max Q? And we were like, well, that's even more power. And they were like, yeah, but it's just a little bit more. It's not that easy to get that extra design power. You really need like it's not just about adding an extra heat pipe or 2 extra heat pipes and that's it. You really have to think about how to dissipate the heat, not just move it.
Everything.
And you need a bigger surface area because you need more fins, you need more space, then the thickness goes up and so on, or the fans get louder. So there were actually people asking, why doesn't the G14 have a 3080 or 2080 option? And, it probably would be possible if the GPU options would go even lower. So, for example, now in a G14, 60 watts is what's possible for the GPU. Technically, NVIDIA, I guess, could make a 60 watt 3080 or 3070. At that point, I think the performance trade-off would probably be so big that people would not like it that much anymore.
Right.
So there's less interest in that. That's why NVIDIA is not doing it. But when you're getting to around 80 watt, 90 watt, you can still get a decent amount of performance, still good performance out of it, and still, in the range of what you get on other 3080 laptops, that it kind of makes sense. Not for most people. This is not like for everyone, but there are people who want this, and that's why we build it. That's why we created this configuration, because people were telling us they do want it. We got requests for this, so we let the market decide. Like, if nobody buys this, we're not going to do it anymore. If people buy it and want it, then we will continue to do it. So at the same time, that's why we're being so open and clear about it. We don't want people to buy it accidentally and not being aware of it. We definitely want people to be aware of it, but I think it's still better to have more options. As long as you have more options, there's always more risk that people, misunderstand something, or they buy something thinking it is something that it isn't. But it's still better to have those options and then try to educate everyone and explain why those options exist and what the difference is, than just making it fixed. There's just one option and that's it, and you buy it or you don't, and that's it.
That's why we're having this conversation. Like you said, just a random note I just want to put in, just thinking about laptop performance in general. I had the privilege to stream with the G17 recently, and I played Doom, and I was hitting like 250 FPS on a device while streaming, which is pretty wild. That's with an RTX 3070 in it. So some of these laptops that are going to be having similar configurations with, that's a 17-inch screen. There's obviously 15-inch screens. We're going to get similar results. So there is a lot of potential here on all these devices, and having that flexibility, you can bring that down to a smaller form factor, get similar results with the G15, and that's really cool. That's impressive to me. It's come a long way.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I was talking about the Zephyrus G15.
Yeah, I know. That's where the
G15.
Yeah, that's where the 3080 is in play. But
right.
Yeah. But
so that's something that some people were asking about. Why is there a Zephyrus G15 with a 3080? And yeah, it's not the fastest 3080 on the market. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to be, really slim and light and portable.
There are really people that want that device. I mean, there are, and that's why. As long as there's people that are interested and there's a demand for that, why not offer it? Cool. So do you want to talk about CPU TGP at all?
CPU TDP? Yeah. So for CPU TDP, the whole situation is getting a little more complicated as well. It's kind of our fault, but we're doing this to help you guys. So what we're doing is, when the GPU is not being used, so dynamic boost, basically, let's go back to dynamic boost from NVIDIA GPUs. What dynamic boost does for NVIDIA GPUs is, when the CPU is not being fully used, then let's take some of that thermal design power from the CPU and shift it over to the GPU, so we can run the GPU at a higher wattage, which means we get extra performance and higher clocks and more frames on the GPU from the GPU. We do something similar with the CPU, where if the GPU is not being used at all, hey, we have the whole thermal module available now, let's boost the CPU TDP. So then we set the CPU power to really high setting, which allows us to give you a lot of extra performance. It's a really big boost you can get from that, to boost the CPU TDP, in case you're doing something, like I mentioned earlier, content creation, video editing, or some code compiling, something like that.
Any kind of rendering.
So so that means for CPU TDP, you have your default CPU TDP, but then it can go much higher as well when the GPU is not being used. So that's information we're going to put on the product pages as well. We're still collecting the detailed numbers, the actual numbers, but it's somewhere in the range of around, for the HX CPUs, so the R9 HX CPUs, those can go up to 90 watts. So when the GPU is not being used, they can go up to 90 watt CPU TDP, which is double of what the thermal design power is. The thermal design power is 45 watts. So you can essentially get double the power. Again, you don't get double the performance. It's always a scaling game, an efficiency game, but you do get a lot of extra performance, as you can imagine, from that. So yeah, that's for the HX CPUs, and for all the regular CPUs, there's still a nice healthy boost going from 45 watts to around 60-65 watts, which is still a nice around 50% extra power you can boost the CPU up to get higher clocks and higher performance. So yeah, the overall situation as a result becomes more complicated. So you don't have, you can't define a laptop anymore and go like, oh, what's the CPU TDP and what's the GPU TGP? In the past, you could do that. You could say, oh, it's this for the CPU and this for the GPU. Now it's like, it depends.
Which is only a good thing, though.
Which is a good thing, yeah. But it is confusing, you know? Yeah. Like if you want to compare different laptops and it's like this one can go from this to this on the CPU and from that to that on the GPU. And then you might even have two laptops that have similar ranges, what they can do on the CPU and on the GPU, but they use it in a different way. So yeah, it's not as cut and dry anymore, where you just go like, you know, what's the CPU wattage, what's the GPU wattage, and then you have an idea. Okay, that's more or less this laptop. But now there's a range.
Are there
involved.
any drawbacks to this other than it being more confusing to the user, or is this always just going to bring more flexibility to the table?
I can't really think of any drawbacks.
That's good. Yeah. No, that's great.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of is that maybe the power is shifted around in a way that you wouldn't want if you are running something unusual. If like it's a specific scenario of how much load you put on the CPU and the GPU, maybe you want more power to go to the CPU.
Could you lock it somehow or no?
Yes, there are ways to disable dynamic boost. You can either disable dynamic boost to ensure that your CPU always gets the full power and the GPU runs only at the TGP. There's a way to do that. I think you can Google it. And there are also ways to limit the CPU TDP to then always force dynamic boost to run at the highest GPU wattage, which you can do as well. On Intel systems, you can limit it. You can limit the CPU TDP in XTU, for example. So that's something you can do as well. And it usually gives you a higher score, a better performance in benchmarks and in games if you do that, if you force the GPU TGP to run at the highest settings, but not always. It really depends on what you're doing, especially in shooters, like we talked earlier, like CSGO, if you're playing Call of Duty or some other shooters like that. You want the maximum FPS. Always. You probably want the CPU as well. Yeah.
Very cool. Very interesting. This is a topic I knew next to nothing about before this week. So I have been informed, and I hope you guys in chat and in the video comments will have learned something here today. We just wanted to kind of open the floor for any kind of conversation to happen here. But any final thoughts, Sascha?
How's chat? Did chat have
They're hungry for graphics cards. We all are.
Yep.
Yeah.
And hungry for frames.
Hungry for Valheim. Frames. Oh man, yeah. I don't think I've ever hit 80. Go ahead.
Yeah. I haven't looked at it yet, but I was thinking the other day there must be somebody who did an article and just looked into like why does it run so poorly and what can we do to optimize it? Like Valheim, what do you want? Just tell us. We'll sacrifice goats and chickens or whatever. What do you want? You need more CPU cores, or do you want higher memory speed or more memory, or what do you want?
I get. What is your frame rate like really bad? What do you tend to get in the game? I'm curious.
It's okay. I'm getting around 50, 60-ish, and I'm on a WQHD high refresh rate monitor, which is like I want. I have a high refresh rate monitor.
I get about 70 usually in 4K on my 144 hertz display. So on the XG27UQ. So
it's 4K.
Yeah, in 4K. So it's pretty good. 4K? I'm playing Valheim in 4K. Wow. So I've like everybody's like, oh, why is this game run so bad? And I'm like, I don't know. It looks great to me. I've got.
You're on a 3070, right?
This is with a 3070 and my CPU is a 3950. So so the 3950 is doing some heavy lifting. Yeah, I think it's doing some heavy lifting there. So
and a 3070
with a 3070, yeah. So I'm like, oh, this game's great, guys. It runs amazing for me. But it's every once in a while though the game has weird things where if you cut down too many trees and trees like start knocking each other down, the whole game lags. Like the whole game's like, all right, what's happening? It's funny.
Yeah. especially when that happens while it's saving the world. You know, when it does
Yeah.
the world save,
Yeah.
it always does it like world save or something, and it always shows up at the top left. And I have an overlay that shows me the frame time as well, so I can see those frame time spikes, right?
Yeah.
And it always shows at the top left, like, oh, it saved the world. And I mean, it's a cool idea from the developer to put this in there so you know why the game is stuttering right now. But then it
Yeah.
says, oh, I saved everything right now, and it only took me 0.2 seconds or something. And it's like, yeah, the game was choppy for like a full second at least, but okay.
Yeah, it feels
Yeah,
bad.
so that seems to be a physics thing, I think. So probably, but if you're even getting that on a 3950 CPU, that's like, oof, that's a lot of cores and really powerful cores.
Yeah. I will. Yeah. It's funny because I came from a 3600 before this, and like the difference. I mean, I've been using a lot of different machines recently, but like the difference from a 36 to a 3900 has been pretty impressive to me. Even my wife's PC I've used a bit. She has a 3900 and the 3950 does feel significantly more impressive when it comes to streaming because of OBS and the additional cores.
Yeah.
They just seem to help pick up the load. There's
But
a question.
You said you're playing Valheim with her as well, right?
Yeah,
So
she's playing on her
is
PC.
it,
Yeah.
how's it running on her? So
Great.
compared,
Yeah, she's
it's
happy.
also
She's
fine.
happy as can be. She's only playing a 1080p right now. She's using a 144 hertz 1080p display, but she's getting around 80, 90 FPS, I think, on average.
Wow. Yeah, that's
she's
nice.
well, she's using a 2080 Ti currently. But
Yeah.
she wants
Time to upgrade my
the
card,
3080.
so yeah.
Yeah. But
I'm on like the very old Titan card that I got from a friend.
oh,
And yeah, that's like a 1070 level performance though. So it's like one of those very old Titan
we need
cards.
to get. See, guys, we don't even have 3080s. Everybody in chat's like, "How do I get a 3080?" We want them too. Everybody wants them. They are mythical beasts. But eventually things should normalize. The question about my display, it's the XG27UQ. It's a 4K 144 hertz display. Gorgeous. It's like everything else looks so bad compared to this. I'm not trying to shame other displays, but I go into, my wife's room and I look at her screen. I'm like, ugh, what is that? 1440p. Ugh.
I can see the pixels. See, if I look up really close, if I press my eyeball against the screen.
Not that 4K is super relevant for Valheim, but it's still fun.
Yeah, with those textures, right?
I know.
But yeah, about the tree chopping, I do that as well, right?
Yeah.
Like the smart way of chopping down trees is you look for trees that stand very close to each other.
Play dominoes.
And then you chop down the ones in the middle and you just play domino.
Well, you want to hit two trees at once or three if you can. And then you want to.
There's two that are right next to each other, right?
Yeah.
And you can hit them both at the same time with each stroke.
Especially if it's like top of the hill. Oh, it's so fun.
Yeah, top of the hill is perfect. Then they roll down and like keep hitting all the trees further down the hill and knocking them down.
Wow.
Yep.
Multiple unicorns in chat that have 3080 Strix editions, or Strix
nice
OC editions. Yeah, but
that's the thing. Like people think, because it's hard to find, there are none out there. There are a lot. We're selling a lot, but people want even more.
The advice that I keep giving everyone is to actually go to physical stores. And one thing that's really nice, just talking about like the availability of hardware, whether it be for consoles, high-end motherboards like the Dark Hero, I know is hard to get for a while. A lot of our laptops are hard to get. Newegg has now started doing lottery systems. They did it for the first time last week, where it's you basically sign up. There's like a 3 to 5 hour window where you sign up. If you're interested, you say, hey, I would like to buy a 3070, right, for example, and you opt in. They'll send you an email either saying, hey, you have a chance to buy one, you got a ticket, or sorry, you didn't get in this time. At least this will help people help them combat scalpers, bots that automatically buy up the supply. That's been a problem.
That's the worst thing. Like any of you guys who are looking for a 3080 can't find one, do not buy it from a scalper. You just make it worse.
You are. Yep.
You're feeding into this whole thing. Yeah. And even if you're just paying $50 extra, it's like that's money. So the guy's gonna be like, hey, I'll keep doing this. All I have to do is just run this bot system that buys cards, and then I sell it for $50 extra each. So yeah.
All right, Sascha, we're wrapping up here. Any final thoughts on this discussion, or you just thinking about Valheim at this point?
Yeah, I can't wait because we were just talking earlier, right? I mined my first copper last night,
So
so
proud of you.
So many new items I can craft and
Did you make
so
any
many
bronze yet?
possibilities. Did I what?
Did you make any bronze yet?
Yeah, I got around 12 units, I think.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Make
I
that
think
bronze armor.
what should I craft first? The bronze sword?
Whatever. I mean, depends on your playstyle. Everybody makes different stuff. I personally went straight for the bronze pickaxe. So it's like I want to be more
Oh,
efficient with mining.
right.
Right? So that's how
yes.
that's how I approach things, but everyone's different.
Yeah. So
all
with
up
that
to you.
one, you can mine more copper faster as well, right?
Well, I think I don't know what the base like if you've leveled up your other pickaxe, it might have more durability than a level 1 copper pickaxe, but the copper pickaxe you know you're going to need in the future, so you can start working towards that. But it is going to be less strokes needed to mine the deposits and so on.
Okay, I think I'll do that.
I think that's the min-max way, but that's just me. That's just me. But I'm looking for an excuse to make tons of Valheim content on the ROG channel. We're gonna find a way because that's all I want to do. I dream about Valheim at night. It's a great game.
Yeah.
It's
hey, next time we can just be in Valheim. We just have our conversation in Valheim.
We'll just sit around. We'll make an ROG base in Valheim, and we'll all just sit around a table and do a podcast. It'll be like
Citadel.
that episode.
Let's build the Citadel.
The Viking Citadel. Okay, all right. You're onto something
we should do
here.
That, like a community project. You know, like we invite other people and then we all build the Citadel together.
I think it's time to make an ROG Valheim server.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we should definitely. But there's like a limit of
10 people, 10 people at a time. Yeah.
I think it's possible to do 20. I heard somewhere.
Oh,
20,
maybe there's a way. Yeah,
it's not a lot. Yeah.
10 is the current max. But all right, guys. Well, I hope you found our discussion informative today. Had a lot of fun just talking about TDP and TGP. Sascha in Valheim. Yeah, I know, Sascha. You gonna be playing Valheim all weekend? You're gonna try to.
No,
you're gonna try to sneak it in.
Yeah. I'll play some for sure, but yeah, I gotta watch the kid as well.
Teach him how to be a Viking. All right, guys. That's gonna do it for us. GG's. We'll see you next time.